Tanks feel unkillable and are often ignored in fights. If that's the case, it might be that tanks perhaps are very tanky, or AD carries like just don't have enough damage. And if they're ignorable in fights, it perhaps means that tanks don't do enough damage. Now, of course, a bunch of people are going to immediately say, what the? No, tanks do too much damage. And so, again, I'm just like responding to your thesis. I'm not saying tanks do the right amount of damage, but mainly like if there's a situation where a tank is completely ignorable, it's probably one of the reasons could be that it's lacking damage threat. Just depends. But generally, though, if you're high health and you're somewhat tanky yourself, aside from tanks like crowd control and whatnot, you probably could ignore them, because what you're worrying about with a lot of tanks is if this guy CCs me, his teammates kill me, right? And so another thing going on is like if you can just ignore tanks, like a question to ask would be, can the tank's teammates follow up to kill you, right? Anyways, I don't know if that's actually true, but like those are things you can think about there. ZERI can make up for Yumi's yellow movability. Oh yeah, so if you're wondering why ZERI and Yumi is a good pairing, or in Yumi's case why like EZREAL Yumi is a good pairing, a strength of characters like ZERI and EZREAL, they're incredibly mobile. And that is actually, in many ways, a weakness when pairing with enchanters. One of the reasons that enchanters are bad at supporting melee champs generally is not because they're actually weak with melee champs. You put Lulu on a Jax, that's actually crazy strong. What makes enchanters weaker with melee champs most of the time is that the enchanter can't follow the melee champ. They have to put themselves at risk to do so. And even if they are following the melee champ will like jump in, and then the enchanter's like, wait for me, I'm too far behind, right? And so Yumi solves that with ZERI. And ZERI is like one of those, not a melee champ, but ZERI is like one of those, yeah, we lucked in. And so ZERI is like one of the best AD carries at running away from an enchanter, and therefore not being enchanted by them. She has her ultimate, which makes her insanely fast. She does the whole jump over entire sections of the map, walls, things like that. And so Yumi is a character who is the only enchanter that can just permanently stay on ZERI the entire time she's doing like her ZERI stuff, and continue to heal her and continue to keep her going. And so ZERI and Yumi are a very like strong pairing, especially when ZERI came out before Yumi got reworked and ZERI got reworked. On the Yumi side of things, one of the things that Yumi has a hard time with is staying alive. And so if the AD carry dies, Yumi tends to die as well. Obviously, Yumi's good at staying alive when there's someone alive, but if someone's dead, Yumi's kind of dead too. And so by taking like an EZREAL or a ZERI, that also does the thing of like, you basically converted one character's safety into two characters' safety. So you've doubled the safety of your bot lane. If EZREAL's safe, Yumi is safe. If JINX is unsafe, Yumi is unsafe. And so that's why Yumi can tend to be a very potent pairing with specifically the mobile AD carries. Wasn't Yumi originally intended to be a champ that can go in with divers? When she originally released, there was more of an acceptance of like, hey, yeah, Yumi can like jump on with a diver. And that just ended up being like very problematic, right? There's two reasons that Yumi jumping on the diver was problematic. Okay? So one of it was, you know how I just told that whole thing about how if an enchanter's healing a like Jax, it's actually pretty good? And the reason it's not insane is because Jax, like the enchanter has to be at risk and can't keep up with the enchanter. And so like, that was one of the problematic things is, here, let me pick my dude. Okay. So one of the issues with Yumi is that when she removed the weakness enchanters have when healing melee champions, and the end result of that was she became very, very overpowered with melee champions, because it's actually pretty crazy if you can reliably give Sylas a second health bar, if you can reliably make Hecarim very fast and keep healing him, if you can reliably follow Nocturne into a fight. It's like a very, very powerful amp on those characters that they normally can't find anywhere else, because, you know, most enchanters either can't follow them or will die if they try. The other issue with Yumi jumping on the Bruiser was she would essentially abandon her AD carry. And so you had this problem where not only did people not want to play against Yumi, but they also didn't want to play with Yumi. Yumi was one of the worst supports you could have if you locked in an AD carry, because you knew at some point first of all, she'd be weak in lane, so she'd lose you to the lane. And then at some point, she would abandon you. And so it was basically, if you were an AD carry and you saw your support lock YUUMI, there's a high likelihood that you were going to have a miserable game. Which, to some degree, was also against what a lot of YUUMI players were like locking YUUMI in to do in the first place. Because what a lot of YUUMI players are interested in doing is being like, hey, I'm queuing bot with my friend, locking YUUMI and following them around, right? But the optimal thing was actually to ditch your friend, queue with a jungle, and follow the jungle around. And so yeah, like two sides to the problem of one of being very overpowered with melee champions in terms of being able to follow them and heal them, and then the other side of the problem being it actually ended up feeling very bad to have a YUUMI on your team as an AD carry because she would very reliably lose you your lane and then abandon you. I thought ZERI YUUMI was so strong because of the Q passive on hit damage and W passive on hit heal that triggered the ZERI bullet. Wait, I don't think that happens, though. Is that true? ZERI's bullets only apply on hits once to the primary target. I'm fairly certain. That said, the on-hit damage is definitely good, and the W on-hit heal is good. Those things are great for ZERI. But I don't think she uniquely abuses them. As far as I know, I don't think she can apply them multiple times. Am I wrong about that? I turned 25, but I realized I don't have any friends at all. What would you recommend doing in this unfunny situation? You don't have any friends at 25? Well, I'll tell you one thing. When I first moved to LA, it took me probably 4 or 5 years to make friends here. So I definitely feel you in regards to it can be hard to make friends in real life, especially if you're in a new place. This sounds dumb and like kind of like obvious, but my suggestion is put yourself out there. Put yourself into social situations where you have a chance to meet people. I feel like I've made a lot of my friends over the last like half decade just ensuring I went to things, and then sometimes I'll meet people there, and then through those people I meet more people. It's just like, it's the most generic advice ever. Just put yourself out there. But like, I don't know. It at least has worked for me in that just exposing myself to situations where I'll meet people has done wonders for my ability to meet people. And if you're like, well, I can't just talk to people, then perhaps find a hobby where the talking does itself. And so what I mean by that is like, if you climb, then it's easier to meet people at a climbing wall because you can talk about climbing, right? If you skateboard, it is easier to meet people at a skateboarding park because you're all skateboarding there, so you have something pretty obvious to talk about. If that makes sense.